There's somebody in the games biz that I've wanted to talk to for a long time. His name is Matt Piscatella. He's the executive director of games at Circana. Basically, he's somebody who has access to an incredible amount of video game data and also is somebody who cares about video games and posts about them all the time and shares that information. And as to me, just somebody truly interesting to be able to get his perspective on a bunch of things. And I was really happy he was willing to sit down and talk to me this week. I have one question to start this all off with is like, what is Circana?
Oh man. Circana is the marriage of the NPD group. Video game people know that company's name. Has been tracking the game space since the 80s. To IRI, which was basically the NPD group for things like grocery stores and drugstores. And so now this combined company really has a full look at what we call discretionary spending, things like outside of mortgages and car payments, the things that consumers have to decide, where their dollars go. So we track all of that now. We track $3.2 trillion in consumer spending in the US alone every year. Video games is one very small part of that. And that's my world.
So here's what I'm curious about, though, is that so Circana puts out what you said what you used to know as the NPDs, right? And so from my earliest podcast listenings, right? I hear about the NPD top 10s, and it is the comparisons, right, of all of the best selling video games in the US in a month. And that used to be so fun to hear about. And it kind of, I don't know, there's something still fun about that. And then on top of that, also hardware sales, like how these rank as well. What I find interesting is that you publicize those. Mm-hmm. That Circana is there for clients, big business people, but then you put these numbers out there for everybody to see. And I'm curious about why that is.
Well, obviously, number one, it's good PR for the brand and to keep, our voice out there in the public conversation for any publishers or retailers or manufacturers that, are interested in these kind of data points. But I do it personally because when I was growing up as a kid, finding information of any kind in regards to how things were selling or performing was just impossible. You might hear snippets here and there. I'm a kid of the 80s crash, and the rebound of the Nintendo era in the late 80s, early 90s. So being through that as a kid and being super interested in games, I know that this world is pretty shut off from the public when it comes to things like finding out about how a video game or video game product sells. And I enjoy trying to do everything I can to help people kind of understand the mechanics behind the industry, while also trying to, maintain those confidentiality clauses and all that fun stuff. So that's why I do it. But we do it as a company because, it's kind of like we've always done it. And I don't know, we think it's pretty important to keep that going.
But so even on top of that, you do in-depth posts that I really appreciate. You look at the data and you find out actually what points are actually interesting. Like when you talk about how well Helldivers is doing in comparison to all Sony first party published games in a long time, right? You're this is 7th amongst everything Sony has ever published. And you're the one who's finding these data points, right? It's not your job necessarily. Nobody's telling you to make these posts, right? You just you're interested in the data.
For better or worse, what you're seeing on the social feed is basically where my head's at or what I'm looking at for other reporting or client specific stuff. And if there's dives I'm doing and I'm like, okay, well, this is shareable and I want to be able to share that with people. I think they'd find it interesting. And I want to help people understand and hopefully have, more pleasant and informed conversations around the industry. I don't know. I think it's important to do that personally. And so when I can offer those kinds of insights or snippets, I like to. And usually it works out for me pretty well. Sometimes companies can find flaws with some of those statements, but we work through those things too.
I'm actually, yeah. So I am curious about your relationship with your clients, basically. And I know you can't talk about anything specifically, but do they ask you what's going on?
Oh yeah.
What do they ask you? What do they even write to you?
So I'm chatting with everybody all the time. From deep dive presentations about the overall market, or even the overall consumer market beyond video games. We do deep dives across all categories of spending and consumer behavior. But generally, like I'm a sounding board a lot of the times. Hey, what's going on here? What's happening with this thing? And I try to offer what context I can using the data we have available. We not only have like the sales data, but of course we do all types of other primary and secondary research around the category to try to help people understand what's going on, because it is such a complex and quickly changing environment. But yeah, I chat with Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony monthly. I chat with other clients whenever they want to chat, or I'll drop a line here and there if something's going on. And been doing this now for like 20 years, both in publishing and out of publishing. So I know some folks, and it's generally pretty good.
For a simple mind of my own, I would ask you to clarify what primary and secondary research is. Like, what does that mean? What are you doing?
So in the primary research world, where we actually go talk to consumers directly or poll them directly, we have things like our player pulse service, which I'll talk about from time to time on social, which is our monthly survey that goes out to many thousands of households. We have what we call our player engagement tracker, which is basically a friends list of thousands of people we have across Steam, PlayStation, and Xbox, where we can see, basically take a snapshot of our friends list every 5 minutes. And then we can kind of track where people are playing, where they're going to, where they're coming from, how long they're playing. So that's all the primary stuff, is where we actually do research directly. And on the secondary side, it's really digging into things like earnings reports from companies, or other research that's made available to try to identify those trends, or perhaps blind spots in areas that, we're not particularly focused on. So it's trying to come up with I hate the word holistic, but the most holistic approach to try to understand what's going on with the video game consumer, what their wants and needs are, and how companies can best meet those.
All right. So talking about like secondary research, right? Mm-hmm. And like Nintendo famously doesn't publish their digital sales data with you, right? Correct. But they do, at the end of like, whenever it's a million seller, they do say, okay, here's exactly how many units this sold. So do you look at those things and like you kind of like cross-reference back to what you were already presuming?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the best inputs, are earnings reports from across companies. I think like Ubisoft in particular, there's a ton you can gain from their earnings reports about things like digital share rates and MTX, or add-on content spending, and how those mechanics are working. So yeah, I'll take every available data point that's put out there and use it in order to better craft things like our total market spending projection, or trying to understand and identify new or developing trends in the market. Yeah, I look at that stuff all the time, man. Like, video games never sleep, and sometimes it feels like I don't either, because I just have you have to have a natural curiosity in this gig around video games if you're going to do this job. And it's probably not good for my health, but it is what it is. So I do dig into all of that stuff.
Very cool. Yeah, I can relate to that. One thing I'd love to talk about today is Nintendo as its own separate hardware market. Mm-hmm. Because I think like, okay, so it's part of the conversation, right? Where it's like, yeah, Sony and Xbox are competing, and then there's crazy Nintendo. But like, that was also like part of like the FTC trials. That was like part of like when Microsoft was trying to acquire Activision Blizzard King, they kind of said that like, look, we don't consider Nintendo a competition. And so I wonder, to you, who's just collecting data, like how you classify the Switch, and then also like what this, like when the Switch 2 presumably is capable of what most of the hardware is today, if that is still like, if we still have to put a line in between.
So there's two ways of looking at it. I consider it, the Switch at the moment, a current generation console. We group all those mm-hmm. together because it is spending that goes to Switch is spending that's not going to some other part of the gaming market, presumably, right? That there is a share question there of how much of that consumer wallet is being allocated between manufacturers, right? In that respect, it is part of the overall gaming ecosystem. However, when Nintendo does something or when there's a big event, say a Zelda launches, Nintendo is going to get that benefit or take that hurt if, for example, we're in April now coming up on the data month and last year was Zelda and this year isn't. And the things that are
Yeah.
impacting Nintendo in particular don't have as great an impact on the rest of the market as, say, a more mainline PlayStation release might have in terms of the overall market. The player base, the behavior, especially around purchasing of first-party titles versus third-party titles, it's much more heavily weighted towards those Nintendo-made titles on Switch, and presumably will be the case on the next generation Nintendo platform, whatever they end up calling it. So in a respect, it operates in its own vertical in terms of player and consumer behavior, but it's still considered part of the overall ecosystem. But if I had to choose and say like, hey, I'm in a case like we saw in the merger discussions, I'd probably lean towards excluding Nintendo from the equation too, because it's its own thing, for better or worse.
Yeah. So, and I guess, I mean, we can only guess right now, but I feel like, so here's, all right, you can stop me at any point and say, Kyle, that's just conjecture. But like, let's say Call of Duty appears on the Switch too, right? Like, I feel like they have an opportunity where the next console will have a lot more overlap, where you do have to decide which of these three things you're buying that game on.
You might. I mean, it's not the first time that Call of Duty would end up on Nintendo platforms. I mean, we did see this in the Wii era, and it didn't significantly impact performance of the franchise on the more PS and Xbox systems. Frankly, it didn't sell anywhere near as much. And considering the installed bases, one would have assumed, and many people did assume at the time, that Call of Duty on these platforms would have been much bigger because the Wii install base itself was so much bigger. So it's likely, again, it's conjecture, right? But this is the games world. This is what we have to do. It's likely that this is going to be, if they do bring Call of Duty to the next generation Nintendo device, it's likely to be an audience that, there'll be some crossover ownership. There always is, between Nintendo products and Sony and Microsoft products. But a good chunk of those people that are going to buy the next Nintendo platform, they're going to be Nintendo and PC gamers or Nintendo and mobile gamers. And so you'll have that pool of folks to try to attract that should be more additive than cannibalistic in that respect, just because there's a good chunk of those people that own Nintendo platforms that just don't own a Microsoft or Sony platform, for example. But again, conjecture, who the heck knows, right? Like, this next Nintendo device could come out and maybe it doesn't find an audience, or maybe it finds a much bigger audience because of how folks have really adopted things like Switch and even Steam Deck for that hybrid type of device. So we'll have to see. It's going to be extremely interesting because the stakes around the next Nintendo platform are very, very high when it comes to the overall market performance of the console segment. So a lot left to be told, and everyone's watching it super closely.
Yeah, actually, I love to hear that perspective on that. I got a question. Would it be fair to call the performance of the Xbox Series stinky?
It started very strong, especially Series S, because we were coming out of the initial phase of the pandemic period, and they were available. And sales started pretty strongly. They have since, as everyone's aware, have tailed off, as Microsoft has talked about itself, has tailed off. At the moment, there's decisions that have to be made about what the future of the platform looks like. Obviously, people are talking about that from Microsoft itself, about reevaluating the go forward strategy. It's a very, very tough market for everybody right now. The average food item you buy in the grocery store is 30% more expensive than it was in 2019. The pressure on
in 2019, you say, even
the average item in the grocery store is 30% more expensive now. So the pressures, and don't even get started on rent, which is also significantly higher. People are leaning into their credit cards. They're
That I'm feeling. Yeah. I know
drilling
that
down
one.
their personal savings, right? So there's tremendous consumer pressure across the board. And I think a little bit of that's impacting the entirety of the console marketplace. I mean, you've watched the numbers. We're talking hardware volumes now down over 20% year on year. April's probably going to be tough. Again, we have that comp to last year's Zelda release, right? So everyone's feeling this pain. But right now, Microsoft's feeling it a little more than most, right? And what they decide to do to try to rebound from that or shift course. I mean, you're hearing and seeing all kinds of things, whether a cross-platform approach or whether, building a new high-end box with perhaps with AI, who knows what they would do there. But yeah, it's tough right now in the console hardware market. It's a very, very difficult, tough market. And right now everyone's kind of pitting their hopes on Grand Theft Auto 6 showing up next year and saving the day. And that in itself is a very risky assumption, trying to put, all of that expectation on one title to kind of lift all boats, type of thing. So yeah, it's tough right now. No question about it.
I do keep hearing that. I keep hearing that like GTA 6 is going to shift the entire generation and make consoles popular again. But I mean, you've seen it, right? You've seen the staying power of GTA 5 and how it can stay on the top of your charts year by year. Well, let's not say on top, but like in the top 10 year by year by year, right?
Yeah.
So GTA 6, like do you expect it to just okay, here's the thing. GTA 5 is unprecedented in its success. Like it's just wild that all worked out that way. Do you believe it can be replicated?
So I think GTA 6 is going to be the biggest entertainment launch in our lifetimes, to this point at least.
Whoa.
It has the potential to launch as the most successful new entertainment product in terms of overall spending in its launch period, right? The question is, right, if you're benchmarking, you're trying to replicate or build on top of the greatest success in the history of video games, it's a very tall ask, right? And the thing that we're really kind of hitting our heads against is the fact that in 20 and 21, everyone who wanted to play a video game for as long as they wanted to play them, played them. Anyone who wanted to spend in a video game as much as they wanted to, they did that in 20 and 21. So in the more developed gaming markets, think US, UK, France, Germany, we know our ceiling in terms of the market size. We saw it in 20 and 21. We haven't been able to reach those highs in either engagement or spending since. And so the question is, for an industry that for 50 years, give or take, saw growth organically the entire time, again, there were some peaks and valleys, all of a sudden we matured as a market overnight. So instead of playing the growth game, we're playing the share game, meaning we're not all planning on growing consistently over time. So, you get a little bit more leeway in terms of your investments because you're saying, okay, the market's going to continue to grow. Now we're saying, okay, for every game I sell, someone else can't sell a game because the market is what it is. And on top of that, we have those established games like Call of Duty, Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox, that are these forever games that have held players for so long, and they're still the top performing games in terms of engagement, right? So you have a mature market with these well-established players that are basically dominating the engagement question. Now, Grand Theft Auto 6, if you look at any product that could bring the players back that we lost since 21, that could bring the hours back that we lost since 2021, it'd be this game. However, the biggest competitor to GTA 6 might indeed be, like you said, GTA 5. Can we convert most of, all of that GTA 5 audience to 6? Is that going to force migrate a bunch of people to buy a new PlayStation or Xbox? I mean, that's the big question. And that's the question everyone's kind of pointing to as we're going to get back to growth because GTA 6 is going to make all that happen. That's a lot to put on one game. But if any game's going to do it, it's going to be this one. So the stakes are incredibly high. But again, if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be them.
So I got a question in regards to you're talking about primary research is more than just time spent. Talking about like sentiment almost, talking about Is there anything in your data that is like the game's cool factor? Do you know what I mean? Like GTA 6 is cool to like. If you're in high school, it's cooler to like that game. It's cool to like Helldivers 2, do you know? And I'm wondering if you have anything to like reflect that.
Yeah, I mean, the closest one that research companies will have is something called purchase intent, where you poll consumers and you ask them, hey, are you interested in buying this game or that game? That'll give you some glimpse of that. And there's affinity scores, which are, how do you feel about a certain brand or game, just seeing the title or seeing the box art? What kind of response are you having to that stimulus, right? So you do get that. The thing that makes games so interesting, frustrating, impossible to try to predict, though, is of any of the products in a store, video games are the hardest to forecast and predict. Gonna get a little in the weeds here. There's something called a correlation factor, where you can take a bunch of inputs and then run them through a regression model, and out kicks out a result, right? So, hey, we have this game at this assumed review score on these platforms coming out at this time. What's it going to sell? And a number will be kicked out. But of all the factors we have to help determine that forecast, it only accounts for about 35% of the variability in sales between titles. Meaning, if you take title A and title B and look at their sales, all of the quantifiable factors will only explain about 35% of the difference between the sales of those two products. So over half of the difference in sales is unquantifiable, unpredictable. Things like the cool factor, things like
the cool factor.
Helldivers 2 shows up. No one on earth thought Helldivers 2 would do what it has done. No matter what metric you looked at, no matter what model you ran that through, nothing would have returned a complete outlier in terms of performance. And that's what makes video games so interesting. That was a very long, complicated answer, but it's hard, I think. It's hard to predict and forecast gaming, which is why we're always so pleasantly surprised when big hits come along that no one saw coming, is because really no one could have seen them coming.
I'm kind of interested in also the opposite of that. Have you ever received some data that's like, oh, this has low affinity, like people hate this, and then you had to deliver that to a client and they had to see what like people actually think about that game?
Usually they know.
Sure. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's rare that we're surprising folks. And really, like, even the affinity scores or thing like purchase intent, they're signs, but they're not reliable consistently.
It's part of that 45%, right?
Yeah, they're not reliable. So you can't look at it and go, hey, we have super high purchase intent. Let's rock and roll. Let's buy some yachts. Because ultimately the game's going to come out, and who knows, like, one huge streamer might have one graphical glitch that'll become the biggest meme on the internet, and all of a sudden your sales tank, even though your game's actually pretty good and had high purchase intent going in, right? So you just never know. But as a developer, if your game's shaping up or not when it comes to the downside, usually.
It's so what is so interesting about what you're saying right now about this uncertainty is that, it seems as though in our current, it might be fair to call it a turmoil, like big publisher turmoil, where like spending is off the charts, right? It seems that one of the greatest sure things that publishers can figure out for getting a sales return is just dumping money into the budget. The more money I spend on my game, the more money I'll receive in return. Are you like, do you get that impression from the people you speak to?
It's a question of the bet in terms of the risk and the reward, right? How big is your risk tolerance? Because the higher the risk, hopefully the higher potential reward. And so you're trying to balance those two things. You hear the phrase fewer, bigger a lot recently. Publishers have come out and said, we're going to make fewer games, but they're going to be bigger. They're leaning more into
Square Enix just said that.
Yeah, they're leaning more into well-known IP. These are all things they're trying to do to lower their overall risk and try to improve their overall potential of return. The IP alone, right? Like that can cut a lot of the potential risk off of your game because it's all a question of risk management right now when it comes to making a game. Because the biggest competitor to your new game isn't other new games in your release window anymore. It's Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, GTA. You're trying to compete against those games for players. So right, like you're thinking, okay, well, smaller bets, you look at what's going on in the market. Every once in a while, there'll be a Helldivers or Pal World, but then you're ignoring the other over 1,000 games that have come out and no one even knows exist, right? So you really can't bet on those games to be the huge hits. You have to lean into your known IP and really try to overinvest in them. But it's a balance, right? And no one knows the right balance. No one knows the equation. If they did, we'd have a lot more hits and a lot more happy publishers.
Okay, I mean, here's the thing is you do have access to a lot of large publishers, and you just saying that phrase is interesting to me. Do you get the sense of like in comparison to other years where you've spoken to them, do you get the sense that they're like more nervous or more confused than usual?
So I think there's a greater amount of uncertainty about what the future looks like, particularly for the console market. Younger audiences are leaning more towards PC and mobile, and they're leaning more towards those forever games like Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite, right? It's different than, say, millennials or Xers or even early Zoomers, which were much more focused on those big traditional console releases that the market's been used to for a long time. So there's uncertainty there about where the young Zoomer and alpha audience is going to end up going and what they want to play. So in that respect, I think we have more uncertainty than ever. But in terms of the nervousness, no, like publishers have always been nervous, and it's all cyclical. The fewer, bigger. We had this happen. Gosh, right after the mid 2000s, EA in particular, like leaned into we're going to have this broad portfolio. Games like Dead Space started showing up. And then after that, they said, no, we're going to go fewer, bigger. And then the market rebounded and, we're going to get, we're going to have more releases. And now we're going back. It's all this like cyclical reaction to what the market environment looks like. Right now we're in a phase that's kind of has a similar vibe to 2013, prior to the launch of the PlayStation 4 era, when, mobile devices were supposed to kill consoles, and we have like the micro consoles coming out. There was a lot of uncertainty then. So it has a lot of those kind of vibes. I still think we're going to rebound and be just fine, but the uncertainty is always makes people nervous.
I did want to talk about the rise of PC because like, as an elder millennial, buying a PC confuses me. I like just like, like making a nice PC. Everyone will tell you it's as simple as possible, but it's actually like, there's 1,000 steps to making a nice PC. And so I wonder how you can possibly gather data on that when it's like, how is a regular person, how's a Zoomer buying a PC? And then how is like, how do you know what part of that is being used for gaming?
So we do chat with consumers every month about their play tendencies and play patterns. And we also do our player engagement tracker work with the Steam platform. So when it comes to the actual mechanics of whether people buy pre-build or build their own, I don't have information there. Like we don't track that part of the market as much, although we do track things like graphics cards. And what's interesting about graphics cards in particular is whether it's a crypto boom or an AI boom, sometimes what happens with graphics cards isn't exactly related to what's happening in gaming. So you got to be careful of that. I think what's really makes things different now is that Minecraft, Fortnite, and Roblox can run on a toaster. And people have PCs that could run those games. And that's where a lot of that activity, especially for younger audiences, is focused on the PC. Or on those Minecraft, Fortnites, and Robloxes of the world instead of the really high-end Steam type stuff that's really pushing the bleeding edge. It's really very much that big mass market middle that's allowing PC to really get bigger as a gaming platform.
That's interesting. So yeah, you see, and you definitely see, you're looking at PC software, yeah. So like, I guess what's interesting to me, and then, you know what, I'm contradicting myself immediately. So like, my vision of what PC gaming used to be and what the market is like the most hardcore of the hardcore, but at the same time, like, The Sims is PC, you know. So like, do you like, maybe it is like the broadest platform of any of them.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And honestly, The Sims 4, you mentioned it in passing, it's actually one of the top 10 most played games across all PC and console that people don't. Still, it's the biggest hit no one thinks about, by the way. So
yeah,
good for you for thinking about it, because a lot of people don't even get it in their consideration set. But yeah, that's what it is. So what we're seeing in our data, especially with, again, alphas and young Zoomers, is accessibility trumps all. The ability to play what they want, where they want, wherever they are, is what's really motivating, as opposed to like, I want to play on the best system, or I want to play the most intense games that someone like from the X era like me would think. Like, hey, if I'm a dedicated PC gamer, does it run Crysis, right? Like, that was our rallying cry forever. Now it's like, hey, can I play this on my my Google machine I got from school? You know what I mean? Or can I do some streaming stuff on it? The expectations on how graphical fidelity is pushed isn't the same with younger folks as it is for some of the older consumers. In general, of course, there's always exceptions to those kind of statements. So, but yeah, that's what we're seeing is, you know, that's why mobile is also so big. 92% of alphas play video games on mobile. You know, it's just the most accessible platform for them. And I think that's what's really throwing a wrench into the traditional console cycle, pushing the envelope kind of model, is that the games that these folks are playing just don't need that.
So actually, I would love to talk about this, because I got theories and opinions
I like that.
about this, the mobile games, which are insanely popular, right? But when you talk about like the value of IP and like tripling down on those things that work for, you know, the big publishers making their AAA games, I kind of feel like the IP is disposable in mobile games. And this is where I would love to be corrected, is where I was looking at the top 10, right? Like Monopoly Go is there, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then there's Candy Crush, and then maybe like 8 other games I've never heard of before. And I feel like will be gone in 3 years. And so I'm wondering if you're seeing that like there is attachment to these IP.
Ooh, that's a great question. We partner with Sensor Tower, which just purchased Data AI, which used to be App Annie, on all of our mobile stuff. We find them to be the experts. You know what? When I talk to those folks, you know, if you look at that chart is about as stable as the console chart when it comes to the top games. If it's Grand Theft Auto, Minecraft, Roblox, and Fortnite and Call of Duty on the console side, it's Candy Crush, Monopoly Go, some version of Scapes, whether Gardenscapes or Homescapes, a couple slot machine games. Like it's basically the same as well. Now, does that IP itself have the pull, or does that particular app have the pull? Tough to say, but I think that when it comes to the mobile gamer, some folks like to refer to mobile gamers as casual gamers. And I think that's completely wrong. Some of the people that are playing these mobile games are playing them for dozens or hundreds of hours. And if that doesn't make them core, I don't know what does. But yeah, they're flipping Candy Crush on the couch, watching Wheel or whatever the hell they're doing. But they're super intense about it and super engaged with it. But yeah, is anyone going to make a Candy Crush console game? Wow, I don't know, maybe, but probably not, because of just the different dynamics, like you mentioned, across the two types of gaming platforms.
Yeah, that's the thing is like I wonder, like, you know, I don't know how much like cross media stuff you look at too, right? Like how many t-shirts does Minecraft sell? Is that something you track as well?
Backpacks, shirts, the whole deal. Pokemon backpacks last year were like one of the highest growth categories in backpacks. So
that is incredibly interesting to me. Wait, do you look at them?
Yeah, trading card games. We track that stuff.
Oh, I mean the backpacks in particular. I want to know if they're new Pokemon or legacy Pokemon that are making the backpacks sell.
Pikachu is still the prime Pokemon pusher in the backpack world, as far as I can tell.
I had one last question for you. Do you ever like watch a podcast? You ever watch like a YouTube video or something, and you think, man, that is so wrong, and you want to correct that person?
So no. I try not to watch YouTube videos. There's a few folks that I think are really good at it that I'll keep track with, like Spawn Wave. I think they do a really nice job. A few other folks do a really good job of kind of digging into what we release and kind of like the business environment. You do a great job looking at the business environment, but I don't watch a lot of YouTube that isn't, because I don't want to have that feeling. But if I do come across stuff where I'm like, okay, that's not quite right, I'll post stuff about that particular thing. Like, okay, hey, this is what's going on. You know, might not be this thing, and try to kind of guide it that way. But you know, the one thing I know after 20 years in gaming is that I don't know, man. Like me and Socrates are close in that regard. I'm like, I don't know nothing. The more I learn about the category, the more I learn about the business, the more I'm comfortable being wrong. And you kind of have to be in my gig, because you're putting out forecasts, you're putting out predictions, and you know what? We just don't know. Our best guess given a certain set of assumptions and a certain set of variables. And if any one of those assumptions or variables goes off, then the whole forecast or prediction will be wrong, right? And you just have to be okay with that. Explain exactly, you know, what assumptions you're using, saying, hey, this could be completely wrong. So, you know, even if I think someone's wrong, they might not end up being wrong at the end of the day, especially when it comes to forecasting and predicting things, because damn it, it's hard.
That's what I'm always saying. Yeah, that's me.
It's hard.
I'm just not right yet. I'm wrong for now, but eventually I'll be right.
Yeah, as long as you're right, what Pachter said it once, as long as you're right more than half the time, you're okay.
Yeah, that's what gamblers say anyway.
I'd like to be right more than that, but you know,
yeah,
sometimes you're not. And it's just because things are weird. So for example, like in the first half of the year, like I thought the first quarter would be really rough. I was thinking total spending would be down double digits, and it just wasn't, because Helldivers and Palworld showed up. Who the hell would have thought Helldivers and Palworld would show up and keep the market flat, or Monopoly Go would do $2 billion in 10 months? Who would have thought that? Like, so, I mean, that's kind of what makes this dumb category so fun, is because you're always surprised.
And then I'm so sorry. That last thing you touched on, are you saying like just 2 hits, just a Palworld and a Helldivers 2 can actually like turn red to black?
Yeah, absolutely. One big game can change the entire story of a quarter or a month, or a market. If we don't have Helldivers in this market this year, we have a much different conversation about where the consumer is in video gaming.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a hits driven business, right? And if you look forward to next year, everyone's kind of looking forward to getting back to growth with GTA 6 and the launch of the next Nintendo platform. If one of those two things doesn't work out the way we think it will, we have a much different story for next year. If both things do incredibly well or better than expected, then all of a sudden gaming's back, baby. And if both of them don't, then, you know, gaming's dead. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, one game, one product can really change the way we all think about this category, even though if you look at a long enough time frame, that line goes up and to the right pretty consistently over time, but it does have those peaks and valleys.
Thank you so much for talking with me and all of us, everybody watching as well. I really appreciate that.
It's been awesome. I've loved you for years. It's great to get to hang out anytime.
What's the best way to track you? What's the best way to follow you?
Get off of Twitter. Don't ever go on Twitter or don't get on Twitter. But if you are there, Matt Piscatella there, but don't save yourself.
How about Threads? Are you tracking Threads?
I'm on Threads, but you can't make a thread on Threads. I'm trying to do like a thread of video game results, and I can't do it, and I find it so annoying. I'm like, hey, you called Threads. Let me make a thread. So maybe
eventually Threads.
If I can thread on Threads, I'll be on Threads threading.
And there you have it. Once again, I would like to thank Matt Piscatella for stopping by this irreverent YouTube channel for that chat. And then also, I wanted to let you know, Delayed Input will be back next week. So until then, thanks for watching. Can I give you one point of criticism for the website, actually?
Sure.
If you scroll down on the video game section of the Circana website, there's some kid who's playing a game that looks like Mortal Kombat with a mouse and keyboard.
So it's a constant struggle with clip art and clip video art to be like, hey, this isn't 1998, or hey, this doesn't exist, or hey, why do we have people using VR when no one's playing VR games? But that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, it's a thing. We're working on it.
Scarlet,
there you go.
Violet and Scarlet.
Everyone who watches this is be yelling at the screen, calling us idiots.
No, I'm cutting that part out. There's no way that gets in there.
Thank God.